So I'm using a sampler. It's happened. I've obviously used a sampler before, but all the stuff I've been doing so far has been mainly focused around the internal synthesis, and as soon as you step into the sampler, there's like a whole other world there. So I've been kind of hesitant to do that until I really get a sense of the machine, which has been really helpful. Like not using a sampler at all, and just working with the internal sounds has been, because I don't know, I'm growing to like them, but I definitely didn't like the internal synthesis for a really, really long time. But yeah, I was kind of keeping myself strict to just using the synthesis stuff inside, so I really get a sense of how the filters work and how the modulation works and all that kind of stuff before I jump into samples, because kind of samples can deal with a lot of that. You put a good sample in there, then you're kind of halfway there. But one thing I kind of got this rhythm for, well, actually the only reason I bought this rhythm originally back in 2019 was I wanted something I could take live that was basically that was portable, that had all the equipment that I use when making tracks sort of emulated, for want of a better word, in this box, and then the individual outs on the back through a mixer, because that's kind of how I work in the studio. But mixers are really heavy, and I like lots of channels, so and a whole load of other problems that this doesn't work for me for some reason, and I could never work out why. And I think it was partly because of the rhythm sound. I just couldn't get what I would consider, or get at what I would consider is the rhythm sound. Like, what does this machine actually sound like? That might sound like a weird thing to say, but I always find there's like an essence to a machine that you can kind of recognize it, and it's the rhythm I find really hard to find out what that is. And maybe it's not like a universal sound like some equipment, and maybe it's a bit more of a specific one for who's using it, but I don't really care what other people sound like. I want to know what it sounds like to me. I want to know what the essence of this machine is to me, at least how I use it. So yeah, the synthesis has been, with these videos and everything, has been, focusing on the synthesis has been a really like a good way to get at the fundamentals of what this machine sounds like. But yeah, I've been really, really eager to jump back into the samples, because you can just do so much more stuff on it. So how to use it was always the question. And I kind of mentioned this a little bit yesterday. For those of you who've watched the video, you don't have to watch it, like watch what you want, but I kind of talked a little bit about how I can get external gear into this machine, and then it's portable, and kind of little steps that I might go through to do that. So what I've got today is this is just like another little sequence that you can see running. Much like many of the things, there's filter settings based on keyboard tracking, based on the pitches for each step. And originally this was running, sequencing the Roland JV1080 rack synth, like using the internal sequencer and sequencing that, and then running through Overbridge to kind of get like a good sound. And there's a sample in there. Actually, I'll play you the sample I used, or at least the original. So this was kind of like this pattern, but just a JV1080. I kind of wanted to, the reason I went for this full loop, because originally I'd pick like one sound, and then you have to kind of pick like maybe a high note or a low note, or the bright one, or how does that translate as the original sequence pitches stuff, like if I wanted to swap out the JV1080 for a sample. And obviously you get all the crap that you get when you pitch stuff, like, I mean, that's fine. And so you're always going to have to like shift it a little bit when you transfer to the sample. But what's the good way to do that? So I kind of took an individual sound originally, and immediately I kind of was back at that point where I'm putting a sound in and I'm having to change it. So what I ended up doing was putting that whole loop in, or that whole section in, so I've got every single note in that loop. And the cool thing with that is you can just move the start markers to pick out maybe what bit works best, and you could arguably put like a different starter marker for each, for each step if you wanted to. you could tailor it a bit more. So I think it's not a case of getting it exactly the same, because you're not going to get it exactly the same, but it's trying to get the essence of that sound and then leveraging the rhythms, trigs and everything to try and get it to some good spot. So what was originally, from that sound we've just heard, that loop you just heard, is quite a rigid. I mean, that was obviously like all the filters open, no effects, just the sound of the JV1080. It's what I've kind of got now. I've put the sample in. It's this much more kind of like sort of grindy, sort of shifty rhythm sort of thing. So you can kind of get these. I'll play a little bit like with the filters and stuff. So yeah, you get some really cool stuff going on there just by shifting the envelopes and so that was like the filter envelope and changing the attack and stuff. Pretty interesting. There's someone drilling in the background, but maybe you don't pick it up the microphone. It's just really fucking loud for me. So the other cool thing is that with the start markers you can get to some really different places with that. So if I just move this around, you get an idea of what that does. Where are we? So the other thing I wanted to mention was the cool thing about using like a whole sequence like that is you get you can kind of pick up your starting point. You can pick up like the end of or the start of the next bit in the end of the first bit you've triggered. So like with this one, every time the note's a little bit longer or sustained, or there's a gap in the sequence, for example, you just get that little extra bit at the end, like what would have been the beginning of the next note. And the cool thing about that, because it's all being pitched, obviously, you get rhythmical stuff that comes out that you wouldn't have otherwise programmed. So I've always used this technique with samples, and it kind of removes that hassle of capturing a sound and then accurately putting it in the sampler and then playing it back like you want an accurate representation of something. It puts it more in the space of like I said before, the essence of that sound, and then you've got this rhythmical stuff that kind of all these little notes and stuff collide together, and it's a lot more intuitive just to play around with the start and end markers, or mainly the start markers, really to just find some interesting stuff. So we got some reverb and stuff going on to just kind of add some movement, but so you get like dynamics as well, because the loop isn't always the same volume. You can see here we've got some really aggressive bits and some more calm bits. So you could scan the loop while you're playing instead of changing the filter. So if you wanted like a quiet bit like we have now, but then you can open up the filter so you get all the texture come through. So I really like that technique. So I think that's going to be a good way of transferring sort of the studio into a sample. The other cool thing is I can upload these samples and share them, and you can kind of do the same thing. So, but I'd recommend trying it. It's pretty cool. I can't remember what it was, but the project is in the description. We'll have it as it started. I think it was around here, wasn't it? You get those glitches or those clicks from the start points of the loop. Obviously, because you can't zoom in on this page, which is a bit naff, but there it is. I noticed I was playing around with this earlier. The delay does some really cool stuff on this bit as we play around with the filter a bit. Yeah, it's pretty fun. I'm going to leave it there. But yeah, I'm going to put the project in the description, and the sample will be included in there, so you can have a play around. But yeah, I don't know, it's pretty cool. I think I might sample some more stuff and see how I can kind of transfer the studio a little bit. Yeah, cheers.